Well, good Wednesday morning, everybody. It is September 15th. We have made it to the middle of September. And as I was just talking to Clint, the old story I always heard was that anytime after September 15th, you can have a frost. So God only knows how much longer we've got before we get a little frost on the ground. It is starting to feel like an early fall. Has felt that way to me for a while. So, any rate, today we are going to look at verses 12 through 25 in the second chapter of John's Gospel. And this includes yesterday we had the wedding at Cana and all of that. But this is another scene from the Bible that pretty much everybody is familiar with, and that is the cleansing of the temple. The one interesting thing that most anyone that reads the synoptics and then reads John should pick up on is that John places the cleansing of the temple at an entirely different time than the other Gospels. He places it at very much the beginning of Jesus' ministry. Jesus' ministry, he had just called his disciples, of course, the apostles, and getting started, and did his first miracle yesterday at the wedding with changing the water to wine. And then he goes to the temple and does the cleansing of the temple. Rather than being the finale, as in the others, which leads up to his death and is part of the justification often used as to why the authorities really wanted to get rid of him was because of his audacity to do the cleansing of the temple. Here, no, it's more of it's that firing across the bow. Here I come. This is what's happening, and so it's the opening salvo, if you will, in his dialogue with the temple and the leaders, the scribes, and the priests. John has positioned it at a different place. Some scholars, some pastors, out of discomfort of there being that change in when it is recorded in Scripture, try to present a two cleansing theory, and I think that's just silly. Personally, there is no need to do that. For whatever reason, John has placed this story at the beginning, and the others have placed it at the end. Doesn't matter. It's the same story. It's the same incident, in my opinion. So, with that, let's talk just a little bit about what's going on in the temple before we read the scripture. Well, I'll change that. Let's read the scripture. All right? John chapter 2, verses 12 to 25. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they remained there a few days. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rise it up." The Jews then said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and will you raise it up in 3 years?" And he was speaking of the temple of his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. When he was in Jerusalem during the Passover festival, many believed in his name because they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, would not entrust himself to them because he knew all people and needed no one to testify about anyone, for he himself knew what was in everyone. Okay. So, first thing about the temple, you have the Holy of Holies, first of all, where only the high priest would enter once a year. Then surrounding that is the court of the priests, and no one but the priests could get into that area. Then the next section of the temple, the next court, would be the court of the men, and only the men, the Jewish men, were allowed into the court of the men. Then you have the court of the women, and there you could have women, you could have the others as well, but the women could be there. They couldn't go any further into the temple than that. They could not enter the temple of the men. And then around that, you have the larger court of the Gentiles. This is where the God-fearers could come to worship, but they can't go any further. And remember in Acts, when we were talking about Acts, that Paul supposedly got in trouble for bringing a Gentile into the court of the men, or into the court of the women even. It wouldn't have mattered. It would have been going too far. The Gentile was not supposed to go any farther than that. Now, I believe they could go if they'd gone through conversion, but of course, Paul was really selling, as we talked about in the study of Acts, and we won't go back into that. He was really selling Jewish light with short of the circumcision and all of that. So that is the general layout. Now, where this is located, where this marketplace that Jesus is coming down on, this is in the court of the Gentiles, okay? And it would have taken up a considerable amount of space because during Passover, Jerusalem would have grown by over 1 million people, roughly, each year. Now, we do know from the story of Luke and in John's Gospel, Jesus is in Jerusalem many times, several times. This is the first here. But in Luke's Gospel, his family's going up there every year. Jesus' family goes religiously to Jerusalem for the Passover. And so this is the case of many of the Jewish families. Now, those that were coming from far distance really couldn't, in a very practical sense, bring livestock with them to be sacrificed. For one thing, you ran the risk of the priests. No, this one's not acceptable. It's not an acceptable offering. You're going to have to go to the money changers or the sellers of the livestock and buy some of the pre-approved critters, okay, that can be sacrificed. So this is kind of the game that they had set up. This is a bit. It's a bit of a I think, what do I want to say, deception, because they could easily control the whole thing. They could easily say, oh, that animal's not one of ours, and I don't know, really, I've never heard that the animals were marked in such a way, but they probably were, to signify that they were animals that came from the people that were selling the marketplace. They wouldn't have been able to put any color on them, over a notch an ear or anything, so they would have had to had a tag around their neck or something like that, because you couldn't defile the animal. That would have made it improper for a sacrificial animal. So, but I digress. So this is the scene Jesus is coming into. But they would have needed roughly 100,000 animals for these sacrifices, or maybe more, with over 1 million people there. All right. So it was a big deal. They were busy sacrificing animals. Those priests were busy. But that's a lot of critters. That would have taken up a considerable amount of space. Bringing the ones in, constantly bringing animals in to be sold. It would have been chaos in some ways. This would have been taking place in the court of the Gentiles. And some of them have said, and I think it's probably a true, if you imagine that scene, how are you going to, as a God-fearer, the people that are not quite yet Jews, coming in, there's no reverence. It's very difficult to have a reverence in that part of the temple because of all the chaos. The money changers are there because you are coming with your own money. You couldn't use anything but a temple coin because it couldn't have a graven image on it, and all of the money, pretty much, other than the temple coins, would have had whoever was the king or the governor or whatever of the area you came from would have had that image embossed onto the coin. So no foreign coins were allowed. It had to be a temple coin. So you had to exchange your money for the temple coins. And of course, guess who gets to set the exchange rate? Well, it's probably most likely dictated by the priest. But the money changers are there telling you how much you're going to get. So you have so many temple coins you have to sacrifice. How much that costs you in your own local coinage, God only knows. So there is a bit of a scam, for want of a better word, going on there with the money as well as the animals. They've kind of got people in a command performance. They've got no other options, basically. So this is what Jesus is upset about. This is not properly glorifying God. The whole spirit has been sucked out of this thing with human greed and graft involved, and so Jesus is protesting that. And of course, at the end, he is talking about that the new temple is the temple of his body, and this temple that is there, as grand and glorious it is. And remember, it's not even finished yet. It's not finished until about the time it was torn down. It wasn't even finished, actually. It never really got completely finished. So it was being worked on for many, many, many years. Gosh, 46 at this time, so that would be 15 years, so about 85 years that they were working on it, and it was not yet done. That's a long, drawn-out building process. But of course, he's not talking about that physical structure. It's a little more obvious in the Greek when you read it in the Greek that at first he's talking about a physical structure, and then when he talks about speaking of the temple later, it's just more of a spiritual. It's a kind of a sacredness is what it's talking about rather than a physicality. So it's a little more obvious in the Greek than it is in the English, much more obvious. So that's what's going on there. Just in a quick nutshell, again, there's lots of things we can draw out of this, much more than we could fill into a short devotion. But it is in John's gospel. He is using it as the launching pad, combined with the miracle in Cana. We have a miracle, and then we have this prophecy. Jesus is a prophet in this section because he's foretelling what's going to happen down the road as he comes up and they arrest him and crucify him, and he's resurrected. That the temple will raise from the dead. So destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. There it is. That's 19, verse 19. So I'll look it up. Okay. Well, I'm going to let you go there because I see we are past 12 minutes, and I don't want these to be any longer than that. So please, please, please have a blessed day, and please, 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 excuse me, be a blessing to someone today. Tell them about Jesus, all right? Talk to you tomorrow. God bless.